The rain hammered against my office window like 1,000 frantic fingers, desperate to claw their way inside. The storm had rolled in abruptly that evening, smothering the city in a wet, impenetrable gloom. I leaned back in my chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above, my eyes heavy from another long shift. The hospital was quiet now, save for the occasional muffled squeak of an orderly's shoes or the distant hum of machinery in the ICU. It was then that I noticed it, a black envelope resting on the corner of my desk. I didn't recall seeing it earlier, and it certainly hadn't been there when I'd stepped out for a quick coffee. My first thought was a misdirected letter from another department, but as I picked it up, the weight of it struck me. It was too heavy, the paper too thick and smooth, almost waxen. The envelope bore no stamp, no address. My name was scrawled across it in elegant, looping handwriting. Dr. Jonathan Mears. But the ink shimmered faintly, as if freshly applied. My heart began to thud unevenly. With trembling fingers, I slid a letter opener beneath the seal, which broke apart with a sound that reminded me of brittle bone snapping. Inside was a single sheet of dark paper, the writing an unsettling shade of gray. The words seemed etched into the surface rather than written, and the text shifted faintly, like it wanted to evade my gaze. Your expertise has been noticed. Tomorrow, 11 p.m., Warehouse 7 on Dockside. No one else can know. That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just a stark demand, as though whoever had sent it already knew I would obey. I should have thrown it away, should have dismissed it as some sick prank. But the words stuck to my mind like the remnants of a haunting melody. My thoughts raced as I reread the message, each time convincing myself I'd missed something. A clue, a sign that this wasn't as dire as it felt. Who had sent it? What did they mean by noticed? The letter didn't make a direct threat, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on me, cold and unyielding. By the time I left my office, the rain had slowed, but the unease inside me only grew. Warehouse 7 at 11 p.m. The words echoed in my head, tangled with the insidious promise that whoever had written them knew more about me than I cared to admit. The docks were a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and skeletal cranes. The air carried a biting chill, thick with the brine of the harbor and the faint metallic tang of oil. My car's headlights cut weakly through the mist that clung to the streets, as if the night itself wanted to obscure my path. I parked near the edge of the lot and stepped out, the ground slick beneath my shoes. Warehouse 7 loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls streaked with grime. A single light above the entrance flickered feebly, casting erratic shadows that seemed to ripple like restless phantoms. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to pretend this night had never happened. But the pull of the letter was relentless. I knocked twice on the rusted door, the sound echoing hollowly into the vast emptiness beyond. The moments stretched painfully thin, and I began to wonder if I'd been mistaken, or if this was a cruel joke after all. Then, the door groaned open, revealing a figure dressed in black. Their face was obscured by a heavy hood, and they said nothing, just motioned for me to enter. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit by a row of flickering overhead lamps. The space was cavernous, lined with stacked crates and old equipment. But my attention was immediately drawn to the group gathered in the center. 6 figures stood in a tight circle, their faces hidden by identical black masks, their forms draped in long flowing coats. In their midst was a table, and atop it lay a small, leather-bound book. The masked figure who had let me in joined the group without a word, leaving me standing alone at the edge of the light. Dr. Mears, one of them finally spoke, their voice distorted by some device in the mask. We've been watching you for some time. Watching me? I asked, my voice unsteady. Why? What is this? Another figure turned toward me, their mask glinting faintly in the dim light. "Your work is exemplary. Your skills are unmatched. We believe you can help us, though you may not yet understand how." The leather-bound book caught my eye. Its surface seemed to shimmer, the edges glowing faintly. My stomach churned as I realized it wasn't the reflection of light, but something emanating from within. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the book. The first figure answered. "The ledger. It chronicles the gifts we provide to the deserving. You'll come to understand in time." This is insane," I stammered, backing away. "What do you want from me?" The group shifted as one, their silent intensity suffocating. The speaker stepped closer, their distorted voice colder now. "We want what you already offer, a surgeon's precision, a healer's hands. In return, we promise discretion, opportunity, a future untouched by failure." The weight of their words was crushing. My mind swirled with fragmented thoughts, dread bubbling just beneath the surface. "You'll hear from us soon," the figure added, their voice dripping with finality. "Consider this your introduction, Doctor. Miers." As they turned back to the table, I stumbled out of the warehouse, the shadows of the docks clutching at me like icy hands. But the worst part wasn't the darkness or the silence. It was the faint sound of whispering that followed me all the way home. Sleep eluded me in the days following the encounter. Every night I lay in the dark, unable to shake the cold, mechanical voices from the warehouse. The ledger. The words hung in my mind, heavy with an unspoken weight. It wasn't long before the book itself appeared in my life. It arrived without warning, left on my desk at the hospital in the same black envelope. Inside, a brief note read, "For your review. It will answer your questions." I stared at the leather-bound volume, its worn cover glowing faintly under the sterile fluorescent lights of my office. My instinct was to leave it untouched, but curiosity, or something darker, pulled me in. With hesitant fingers, I opened the book. The pages were brittle, the edges browned with age. Yet the words were unnervingly sharp, written in an elegant silver ink that seemed to ripple as I read. Names filled the pages, each paired with a detailed description of an organ, heart, liver, lungs. Next to these were addresses, dates, and cryptic notes I couldn't decipher. The book felt alive. As I ran my hand across its surface, the names seemed to shift, the letters rearranging themselves when I tried to read too closely. My name appeared for a moment, startling me, before vanishing again into the endless stream of entries. The unease grew with each page I turned. It wasn't just the strangeness of the text or the sinister implications of what it documented. It was the whispers. They started faintly, barely more than a rustle at the edge of my hearing. But as I flipped through the ledger, the whispers grew louder, clearer. Voices, many voices, spoke in overlapping murmurs, their tones desperate, pleading. "Help us! Stop them! Run!" I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. The whispers ceased instantly, leaving the room in an oppressive silence. In the days that followed, the ledger became a shadow over my life. No matter where I hid it, it would reappear on my desk the next morning. And each time I opened it, the names were different. But it wasn't until I started seeing the faces that my resolve truly began to unravel. It started with the patients, people I'd treated years ago, whose cases I remembered clearly. They would appear at the hospital, lingering in hallways or sitting in waiting rooms. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but their presence carried an unsettling air of familiarity. One night as I walked to my car, I saw her. Mrs. Adair, a woman I'd performed a routine appendectomy on 2 years ago. She was standing in the shadows of the parking lot, her expression vacant, her hands clasped tightly at her sides. "Mrs. Adair," I called out, my voice shaky. She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her lips parting slightly as if to speak. But no words came, only a faint, raspy breath that sent chills down my spine. I stepped closer, but as I did, she turned and walked away, her form dissolving into the shadows. The next morning, her name was in the ledger. The ledger had become an anchor, pulling me into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The more I resisted its presence, the more it seemed to seep into every corner of my life. It began whispering at night, even when it wasn't open. The voices were clearer now, fragmented and haunting. "You can stop this," one voice said. "They are watching," whispered another. I didn't know what they meant, but the weight of their pleas crushed me. One evening, I tried to confront the ledger, determined to uncover its secrets. I sat in my office, the book before me, and opened it to a random page. A new name stared back at me. Margaret Ellis. My heart sank. Margaret had been my patient 3 months ago. I had performed a risky but successful liver transplant on her. The notes beside her name chilled me to the core. Liver. Exchange complete. Balance maintained. I slammed the book shut, bile rising in my throat. Later that night, as I sat in the hospital's on-call room, Margaret appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't speak, but her gaze locked onto mine with a desperate intensity. "Margaret," I whispered, rising to my feet. She stepped closer, her movements slow and hesitant, as if fighting some unseen force. Her lips moved, but the words that came out were barely audible. "Save me." Before I could respond, she was gone, her form dissolving like smoke. The ledger was waiting for me when I returned to my office. I stared at it, trembling, as a realization dawned. The book wasn't just a record. It was connected to these people, my patients, and to whatever sinister force was behind the organ keepers. The next day, I decided to seek answers. I returned to the warehouse, the memory of the masked figures gnawing at my resolve. But when I arrived, the building was empty. No sign of the group, no table, no lights. Just a cavernous space filled with silence. I was about to leave when I saw it. The ledger, sitting in the center of the floor, its pages fluttering as if caught in an invisible wind. As I approached, the whispers rose again, louder and more insistent. The names scrawled across the open pages twisted and writhed, forming a single word. Trapped. The whispers stopped, and the silence that followed was unbearable. I backed away, my mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about organ trafficking. The ledger, the whispers, the faces, they were all part of something far darker. I had to find a way out, but every step forward felt like sinking deeper into the abyss. The ledger had bound itself to me, and I feared there was no escaping its grasp. The ledger had become my shadow. It waited for me at the hospital, lingered on my desk at home, and even appeared at my bedside one restless night. Its presence consumed me, and the whispers had grown to an unbearable chorus. Each voice carried a distinct tone, pleading, warning, demanding. But they all said the same thing. End it. Set us free. I spent days scouring every resource I could find, medical records, hospital archives, even obscure texts on occult practices. The deeper I delved, the more I uncovered connections between the names in the ledger and strange disappearances, unexplained medical anomalies, and organ transplants that seemed impossibly successful. The organ keepers weren't merely trading organs. They were using them to bind something, someone, to the ledger. One night, I awoke with a start, the whispers louder than ever. The book sat on the nightstand, its pages open and glowing faintly in the darkness. The words on the page had rearranged themselves again, forming a chilling directive. Return to the source. I knew what it meant. The warehouse. The docks were shrouded in fog that night, the air heavy with a damp chill that clung to my skin. Warehouse 7 loomed ahead, its shape barely visible through the mist. As I stepped inside, the familiar metallic scent of the place filled my nostrils, and a chill ran down my spine. This time the room was different. The space had shifted, the floor now marked with a massive, intricate circle etched in ash. The air felt thick, vibrating faintly with energy, as if the warehouse itself were alive. The ledger lay at the center of the circle, its pages fluttering as though caught in a phantom wind. The moment I stepped closer, the whispers erupted again, deafening and frantic. "Hurry! Close the ledger! Free us before it's too late." I knelt by the book, my trembling hands hovering over its ancient cover. The words on the open pages writhed, forming a strange, jagged script I couldn't read. My heart pounded as I realized what was expected of me. I had to sever the ledger's hold. But how? As I hesitated, the room darkened, and shadows crept toward the circle, their forms shifting and writhing like living smoke. They surrounded me, moving closer with every passing second. From within the shadows, I could see faint faces, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent cries. I flipped through the pages, desperate for guidance, and my own name appeared again, glowing in silvery ink. Jonathan Mears. The voices grew louder, overlapping into an unintelligible roar. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The noise wasn't coming from outside, it was inside my head. Then, as if responding to my thoughts, the voices fell silent. In the stillness, a single voice, soft, familiar, rose above the rest. "Write your name, Jonathan. Write it, and it will end." My stomach churned. Writing my name felt like surrendering to something I didn't understand, but the alternative was unthinkable. The shadows pressed closer, their cold presence suffocating. I looked down at the ledger, and a silver pen materialized on its open page. It vibrated slightly, as if alive, waiting for me to act. The room pulsed with a strange rhythm, the air alive with tension. The whispers returned, now unified in a single plea. "Please." With a shaking hand, I picked up the pen. The ink shimmered as I began to write, each stroke feeling heavier than the last. As my name took shape on the page, the room quaked, and the shadows froze. When I finished the final letter, the ledger snapped shut, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. The circle of ash on the floor dissolved, and the shadows recoiled, their forms dissipating into the air. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the closed book. The oppressive weight that had haunted me for weeks was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. I left the warehouse, the ledger tucked under my arm. It didn't glow anymore, and the whispers had ceased, but its presence was still unsettling. The next morning, I placed the ledger in the hospital archives, sealing it inside a locked cabinet no one used. I told myself it was over, that I had broken its hold. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the end. The voices were gone, the shadows dispersed, but the book remained. And somewhere, beneath its dark cover, I felt it waiting for the next name to be written.